Hello, Anime VISOR here,
and SiGNUM,
with a review for Lupin III the First. As you can tell from that clip, this is a full 3D animated film. In fact, it's Lupin III's first fully 3D animated film.
That's a bit concerning.
I know, historically speaking, anime and 3D animation don't have the best track record. The animation a lot of times can appear slow and choppy, but occasionally the anime industry does put out a good one, most notably with anime like Land of the Lustrous, and a film that is probably a very apt comparison to Lupin III the First, Space Pirate Captain Harlock, as both it and Lupin III are classic 2D animated franchises in Japan, with both having anime that originally dated back to the 1970s, that got 3D animated facelifts. That is a roundabout way of saying, the 3D animation in Lupin III the First is top notch, and if not on par with Pixar's level, definitely on par with DreamWorks or Sony Animation.
That's a relief to hear.
That all out of the way, let's move on to the review proper for Lupin III the First. Lupin III, the grandson of the gentleman thief Arsène Lupin, is back again with his usual crew, including his right-hand man and sharpshooter, Daisuke Jigen, the talented samurai swordsman, Goemon Ishikawa XIII, of course Lupin's on and off love interest, the wily and crafty Fujiko Mine, and finally the man trying to bring Lupin to justice for all his thieving, Inspector Koichi Zenigata from the ICPO. This time around, Lupin teams up with a woman named Letitia to steal the Bresson Diary, a treasure that not even his grandfather could steal.
So how was the movie?
I did overall enjoy it, but I do wish the movie itself did a better job establishing that the treasure was something Lupin's grandfather couldn't steal. The movie sets up that Lupin just so happens to have a keepsake from his grandfather, which turns out to be the other half of the key Letitia has. It builds decently off that premise, but that's totally different from what the synopsis for the movie says. It's also pretty vague on how Lupin knows that the name of the treasure is called Eclipse. He just mentions it in conversation while seemingly trying to make a point to Letitia. Had that scene happen after they'd opened the diary, I think it would have made more sense, but as it is, that scene seems a little out of place. That aside, once the movie gets going, it's fine. It's an action-packed adventure with Lupin and his crew. And as a fan of Lupin III, I enjoy watching these characters again, now with 3D animation. But if this movie is your first introduction to the Lupin III series, there's very little setup for Lupin and the other main characters. So newcomers may be a little lost at first, but the movie does a decent job at portraying the type of characters the main cast are. Heck, I just explained them in the synopsis, so the characters aren't too hard to figure out. The story, however, isn't all that new. It's a pretty standard Lupin adventure. Lupin and crew learn about a treasure and are going to try and steal it before the baddies can, because said group of baddies will use it for evil. The base story will be familiar to most Lupin III fans, but there's a lot of fun action moments in the film. It's a Lupin III Joyride with 3D animation, which is a big selling point for the film. The characters look great, they're fairly detailed, but still keep their anime-like appearance. Just with a glance, you can easily tell Lupin looks like Lupin, Jigen looks like Jigen, Goemon looks like Goemon, Fujiko looks like Fujiko, and Zenigata looks like Zenigata. That may sound pretty simple, but it doesn't always work out that way. I mentioned Space Pirate Captain Harlock earlier, and as an example, it does a good job translating Harlock into 3D, and an okay job with Keiyuki, but went in a completely different direction with Mime's appearance. Getting the appearance of iconic 2D characters to look good in 3D is important. Lupin and his crew, along with Zenigata, are the lifeblood of the Lupin III series. So when the 3D characters look and act like their iconic 2D counterparts, it's going to feel like a proper Lupin III adventure, and that's very much the case for this movie. Lupin III the First isn't the most original Lupin story. I imagine they played it safe considering this is Lupin III's first fully 3D animated film, but it was at least a fun action-packed adventure. I think it would be great if we continue to get more 3D animated Lupin III films, to hopefully attract more fans to Lupin III. While it's a pretty popular series in Japan and even in Italy, It's a series that doesn't get a ton of traction even in the anime community in the US, the one exception probably being the Castle of Cagliostro. Also, on the off chance any parents are watching and wondering if it's okay to let their kids watch Lupin III the First, I believe it was rated PG-13, so it's definitely no Frozen. As for the type of content you can expect in Lupin III the First, there is some violence, fighting, punching, and gun shootouts, that sort of thing. There are probably 4 or 5 on-screen deaths, a couple from a car accident, a person getting shot, and one where a henchman for the bad guys gets sucked or squished into nothingness. In case you worry about the depiction of smoking, the character Jigen is often depicted with a cigarette in his mouth. There's also some suggestive flirty behavior from characters like Lupin, who does briefly try to forcibly kiss another character, and comedically appears in his underwear a couple of times if I recall. Then there is Fujiko, a femme fatale-like character, that has some suggestive dialogue and mannerisms, including a brief scene where she undresses and changes off-screen while in front of Lupin. There also may be some light cursing, words like hell, damn, and bastard. I watched it subbed, so I'm not sure how the English dub version was handled, but I imagine it would use similar language, so be aware of that.
If you compared the rating to another movie, what would it be?
Given the story, tone, and all the action, a good comparison may be the Indiana Jones movies. If you feel that your child or children are old enough to watch the Indiana Jones movies, then Lupin III the First should probably be okay as well. Now, normally I don't cover the rating of something I review in that manner, but the possibility that a parent or young kid sees the 3D animation and assumes Lupin III is okay for kids is probably higher than you may think. I'd also like to prevent what happened to some parents when they went to watch Whitesnake with their kids. Whitesnake is a Chinese 3D animated film that was rated PG-13, that on top of the violence and scary scenes you get in a supernatural action film, also has a not so subtle sex scene, so there's a little parent advisory for Whitesnake as well. To wrap things up, I overall found Lupin III the First to be a good movie. I would have liked it to not play so safe with the story, but it still very much is a Lupin III adventure, with again, very top-notch 3D animation. If you're new to Lupin III, specifically if this is your first venture, you may be a little lost at first with some of the characters, but as you watch the movie, what makes them tick should become more clear. So whether you're an old fan, new fan, or this is your first ever Lupin III, I recommend you check out Lupin III the First. If for nothing else, to see how far the anime industry has come with its 3D animation.
Imagine if Berserk had that type of 3D animation.
Don't do that to me, SiGNUM. Don't give me hope. With all that said, what are your thoughts on Lupin III the First? Let us know in the comments below. As always, I've been Anime VISOR.
And I've been SiGNUM.
Thanks for watching, and goodbye.
Goodbye.